First up, David Berkowitz. Born Richard David Falco on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn. His birth mother, Betty Brower, handed him away just days after he was born. She was a single waitress, caught up with a man who couldn't be with her. The baby was adopted almost instantly by Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a quiet couple from the Bronx who ran a hardware store and longed for a child. They named him David, swapped his first and middle names, and raised him as their own. From the outside, the home they made felt steady and loving. But underneath, things were already starting to fracture. Neighbors remember him as a difficult kid, prone to snapping. He bullied other kids and stole things not because he needed them, but because he had to. Teachers saw he was smart, but he had zero focus to channel that energy. His parents even took him to see a therapist. Nothing made a dent. School was rough. He was mocked for his weight and religion. Soon he started setting fires. Tiny blazes at first, secretive then larger ones. He later admitted he just loved the feeling of watching things go up in flames. When David was 14, his adoptive mother died from breast cancer. Something shifted inside him. He pulled away from everyone, and things got tense with his dad, especially after his father remarried. In 1971, at 17, he signed up for the Army. He served at Fort Knox and later with an infantry unit in South Korea, finishing his service in 1974 before heading back home. He was 21, searching for something he couldn't even put a name to. Instead, he found the truth about his past, or what he was told was the truth. Back home, Berkowitz reached out to his birth mother, Betty. She told him the reality of his birth. He found out his father, Joseph Kleinman, was a married man who didn't want him. He was a secret, a burden, a child birthed only to be given away. Forensic expert Elliot Layton later called this the breaking point of his life, a total collapse of self that he never really came back from. He drifted through dead-end jobs, bounced between cheap apartments, and became more and more of a loner. He moved into 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. He claimed the place was crawling with demons. He said they whispered to him at night, ordering him to kill. On Christmas Eve, 1975, David Berkowitz attacked 2 women in Co-op City with a hunting knife. One, 15-year-old Michelle, was stabbed 6 times and spent a week in the hospital. The other victim, an unidentified Hispanic woman, was never linked to the case. Berkowitz wasn't even a suspect. He soon moved to Yonkers. He was working as a mailman. To everyone else, he was just a total nobody. Then, on July 29, 1976, around 1 in the morning, Berkowitz crept up on a car parked in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx. Inside were 2 young women, Donna Loria, an 18-year-old EMT, and her friend Jody Valenti, 19. He pulled a .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog from a paper bag, crouched, steadied his aim, and fired. Don Loria was hit once in the head and died right there. Jody Valenti survived a thigh wound. Then Berkowitz just walked away. Over the next 13 months, he struck again and again. He shot 2 young women in Flushing, Queens that October. One survived with severe head trauma. In November, he shot 2 teenagers on a porch in Floral Park, leaving one permanently paralyzed. He killed Christine Freed inside a parked car in Forest Hills that January of 1977. He targeted a Columbia University student named Virginia Voskerichian, gunning her down in March as she held up her textbooks, a hopeless shield against the bullets. In April, he shot 2 people near the Hutchinson River Parkway, killing them both. In June, he shot Salvatore Lupo and 17-year-old Judy Placido in Bayside. Luckily, both survived. Throughout this spree, he sent taunting, bizarre, and terrifying letters, left at crime scenes or mailed to columnists. He called himself the Son of Sam. He branded himself a monster, claiming a demon named Sam ordered him to kill. He boasted that he loved the hunt and promised he would return. That summer of 1977, New York City was gripped by pure, collective terror. Women with long dark hair, his preferred targets, rushed to cut their hair, bleached it, donned wigs, and began to fear even sitting in their own cars. The tabloids printed his letters word for word. One paper sold over 1 million copies in a single day just for featuring his twisted notes. The break in the case was just an ordinary parking ticket. A witness near his final attack, the shooting of Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante in Bath Beach, Brooklyn on July 31, 1977, which killed Stacy and blinded Robert, remembered a man walking away from a car parked by a hydrant. Investigators tracked down every vehicle ticketed that night. One was registered to David Richard Berkowitz of Yonkers. Detectives swarmed his apartment building on August 10th, 1977, and found him sitting calmly in his car. He was 24. He was packing a fully loaded .44 revolver. When officers asked his name, he just smiled and said, "I am the son of Sam." He confessed to everything. At first, he blamed his neighbor's dog, owned by a man named Sam Carr, claiming the animal commanded the murders. After extensive psychiatric exams, he was found fit to stand trial. He pleaded guilty to 6 counts of second-degree murder, receiving 6 consecutive life sentences. Years later, he finally admitted the demon dog story was a lie, invented just to make him seem insane. He then claimed a satanic cult orchestrated the shootings as part of some ritual. A 90s investigation looked into those claims, but it stalled out after finding no solid proof. The absolute truth behind that story remains a mystery. In prison, Berkowitz became an evangelical Christian and now calls himself the Son of Hope. He has been denied parole every time he has asked. Today, he is still serving time at Shawangunk Correctional Facility. His crimes pushed the New York State Legislature to pass the now famous Son of Sam laws. We have laws meant to stop convicted criminals from making money off the fame their crimes created. Dozens of states have adopted similar rules since then. Today, you and I are looking at the David Berkowitz story, a case investigators and psychologists keep circling back to. The adopted kid who found out he wasn't wanted. The angry boy no one could seem to reach. The man who poured all that rage into city streets, hunting people who never knew he was there. New York City still remembers the summer of 1977. It wasn't just about Berkowitz. That summer changed the city. It forced us to realize exactly what one person alone and undetected is capable of. Next up, let's talk about Albert Fish. Born Hamilton Howard Fish on May 19, 1870 in Washington, D.C. He was the youngest, born into a family that his own lawyers later called a legacy of mental instability. His father was already in his mid-70s when he was born. His mother struggled with both visual and auditory hallucinations. His uncle dealt with mania, and his brother spent years in a state hospital. Mental illness was woven into the Fish family bloodline so deeply that researchers couldn't look away. His father died from a heart attack when Fish was just 5. His mother couldn't handle him alone, so she sent him to St. John's Orphanage in Washington. That is where his dark transformation really began. Life at that orphanage was brutal. Physical punishment was a daily occurrence for the kids. Fish claimed he didn't just endure the abuse, he started to crave it. He formed a permanent obsession with pain, both giving it and taking it, which colored every single relationship and violent crime for the rest of his long, twisted life. By the time his mother finally took him home in 1880, when he was only 10 years old, he had already been subjected to things by older boys that permanently warped his mind. He moved his family to New York City by 1890, working as a painter. That is when he began preying on boys, specifically the young and vulnerable. He picked victims he thought wouldn't be missed. Kids with disabilities, or kids of color, or children from families too poor or overlooked to fight for them. He raped them. He later bragged about victimizing at least 100 kids across different states, though it is impossible to know how much of that was real and how much was just a decaying mind-spinning fantasies. He got married in 1898 and had 6 kids. For years, he kept up the facade of a functioning, if strange, home. His wife finally left him for someone else in 1917, cleaning him out. Fish was left alone to raise 6 kids with a mind that, by his own later admission, was supposedly taking orders straight from God. He started hearing voices. He would wrap himself in a carpet at night, claiming the Apostle John told him to. He began shoving sewing needles deep into his own groin and stomach. After they finally locked him up, X-rays showed at least 29 needles stuck inside his pelvic area. He built a wooden paddle studded with nails, using it on himself and urging local kids to do the same. Every psychiatrist who examined him later agreed that Albert Fish lived in a world of suffering, so private and absolute that it felt alien to anything a normal mind could create. On July 15, 1924, 8-year-old Francis McDonald vanished from Port Richmond in Staten Island after playing in the street. His body was found hanging from a tree in the nearby woods. He had been assaulted and strangled with his own suspenders. Neighbors reported seeing an older man with gray hair and a mustache near the spot that day. a description that would prove hauntingly accurate. The case went cold. On February 11th, 1927, 4-year-old Billy Gaffney disappeared from a Brooklyn apartment hallway while playing with a friend. A trolley driver later told police he saw an old man dragging a crying boy onto his car. Billy Gaffney's body was never recovered. His mother visited Fish in prison years later, desperate to know her son's fate. He refused to say a word to her. He wrote a letter to his attorney confessing the crime. It remains one of the darkest documents in American legal history. Then came the crime that finally brought his end. On May 28, 1928, Fish showed up at the Budd family home on West 15th Street. He was 58 years old. He introduced himself as Frank Howard, a farmer responding to a newspaper ad placed by 18-year-old Edward Budd, who was searching for work in the countryside. Fish told the family he would return in a few days to take Edward to the job. Upon his return, he met Edward's 10-year-old sister, Grace. Looking at the girl, he instantly changed his plans. He lied to the parents about a niece's birthday party and asked if Grace could join them. The Budds agreed, trusting the harmless-looking old man. Grace left willingly, dressed in her best white Sunday dress. Fish brought Grace to a derelict house in Westchester County known as Wisteria Cottage. He had picked the spot beforehand. What happened there was confirmed by his own chilling confession. Grace Budd was strangled to death, then dismembered. Fish went back to that abandoned house several times over the next few days. Her remains were never fully found. For 6 years, the disappearance remained a mystery. Then, in November 1934, an anonymous letter reached the Budd home. Grace's mother couldn't read, so her son read the letter aloud. It described what had been done to Grace in cold, methodical detail. It wasn't signed, but the envelope held a clue. A hexagonal emblem from the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. A chauffeur told detectives he had left stationery from that group at a rooming house on East 52nd Street. The landlady of that house said her former tenant had moved out, mentioning a son who sent him money. Detectives staked out the building. On December 13, 1934, Albert Fish came back. When Detective William King moved to arrest him, Fish pulled a razor blade but was quickly disarmed. At the station, Fish confessed to everything and offered to lead police to the site of Grace Budd's remains. His trial for the murder of Grace Budd kicked off in March 1935 in White Plains. The insanity defense, built by his lawyer, leaned heavily on a mountain of psychiatric reports. 6 experts for the defense took the stand, all calling Fish insane. The defense lawyer's final question to the lead psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Warham, was 15,000 words long, a brutal catalog of every twisted moment in Fish's life. Warham kept it brief. 2 words: he is insane. Prosecutors fought back, arguing Fish knew right from wrong, no matter how warped his mind was. In the end, the jury saw him as sane and guilty. Not a single one of those 12 jurors doubted he was mentally ill. A juror later admitted they just felt he deserved the death penalty regardless. Albert Fish met his end in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison on January 16, 1936. He was 65. They say he even helped the executioner place the electrodes on his own body. His final words? "I don't even know why I am here." Afterward, his lawyer shared that Fish wrote a final statement in his last hours. It was several pages long, but the lawyer refused to let anyone see it, calling it the most filthy string of obscenities he had ever read. Albert Fish is a man who defies simple labels. He wasn't some guy driven by blind rage. He didn't kill out of fear or desperation. For 60 years, he moved through life with a quiet, patient darkness he actually thought was sacred. His story proves that some childhood trauma doesn't heal, it just hardens. And if you give it time and room to breathe, it destroys everything in its path. Next up, Joel Rifkin. He was born on Valentine's Day, 1959, to 2 college students who weren't ready for a baby. His biological father was a veteran. His birth mother was a student. Within 3 weeks, Joel was adopted by Bernard and Jean Rifkin, a comfortable, upper-middle-class couple living in East Meadow, Long Island. On the surface, the life they gave him seemed perfectly normal and secure. But Joel Rifkin never quite fit in. Even in elementary school, he wrestled with learning disabilities that made basic tasks feel like impossible hurdles. Other kids noticed. He was bullied throughout his childhood, relentlessly, day after day, in the way small cruelties pile up until they define who a kid becomes. He finished East Meadow High in 1977, barely leaving a mark, bounced between a few Long Island colleges, like Nassau Community in SUNY Brockport and Farmingdale, but never finished a degree. He eventually found work as a self-employed landscaper, working on his own, driving his truck all over Long Island, basically a ghost to everyone around him. In February 1987, his father Bernard died by suicide after a long battle with cancer. It was a massive loss, and later, experts saw it as a turning point. Bernard had been his only anchor. Once he was gone, something inside Joel finally snapped. On August 22, 1987, Rifkin was pinched in a prostitution sting. It went down in Hempstead after he propositioned an undercover officer for sex. At the time, nobody could have guessed the nightmare that was coming. Everyone treated it like a minor blip. He paid a fine and went home. On February 20th, 1989, Joel Rifkin committed his first murder. His victim was 25-year-old Heidi Balch, killed right in his family home. Then the horror truly began. He methodically carved up her body, removing teeth and fingertips to hide her identity. He even put her head in a paint can before dumping the remains elsewhere. He dumped that head on a golf course hole in Hopewell, New Jersey. Her legs turned up in New Jersey while the rest was tossed into the East River. Heidi Balch stayed nameless for 24 long years. It wasn't until 2013 that DNA technology finally gave her back her name. Between 1989 and 1993, Rifkin claimed 16 more lives. He targeted women working on the streets, choosing his victims with care. He knew the system would be slow to investigate these disappearances. He banked on the fact that no one would connect the dots or mourn them properly. These women were mostly in their 20s and 30s, lives stolen too soon. Their remains surfaced everywhere, from lonely woods to oil drums floating in industrial creeks. It showed a man with a cold mechanical system for making people vanish. To this day, some of those victims were never even identified. They are just footnotes in court records known only by where they were found. Through those 4 years of terror, Rifkin lived a quiet life in East Meadow with his adoptive mother. He just kept working as a landscaper like nothing was wrong. He drove the same old truck, acting like just another guy in the neighborhood. No neighbors grew suspicious. No coworkers ever caught on to his secret. To everyone passing by, he was just another forgettable, unremarkable man. His luck finally ran out early on June 28, 1993. 2 state troopers were on a routine patrol just after 3 in the morning. They spotted his 1984 Mazda pickup cruising without a license plate. When they hit the lights, they expected a routine traffic stop. He didn't pull over, he floored it, leading them on a desperate chase. 20 minutes later, he veered off the road and smashed into a light pole. The man behind the wheel was Joel David Rifkin. When troopers searched the truck bed, they found 22-year-old Tiffany Bresciani wrapped in a tarp. She had been reported missing days earlier after telling her boyfriend she would be back in 20 minutes. What unfolded next left all of Long Island in absolute shock. During his interrogation, the floodgates opened and Rifkin started talking. He rattled off victim after victim, detailing exactly how and where he killed them. Detectives scrambled, trying to piece his dark confession together with cold cases and unidentified remains recovered over those 4 years. The official body count climbed to 17, marking one of the most brutal sprees in the region's history. That made him the most prolific serial killer in New York State history. When he finally went to trial, Rifkin was convicted of second-degree murder for Tiffany Bresciani's death in May 1994. Over the next 2 years, he pled guilty to 8 more murders, stacking sentence upon sentence. It ended up being 9 life terms, totaling 203 years to life behind bars. At one hearing, Rifkin actually apologized, finally admitting to 17 total murders. He was moved to Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York, where he stays to this day. The case forces us to ask tough questions about why some disappearances trigger urgency while others are ignored. During the years Rifkin hunted, bodies turned up in rivers and dumps across the city. Police would open cases, maybe take a quick look, and then shelve them. The women he targeted were already living on the margins of society. Their murders only gained attention after a driver with no plates blew past a patrol car in the middle of the night. Joel Rifkin is a grim reminder of how predators thrive by exploiting their own invisibility and the vulnerability of the people they choose. Number 4. George Metesky. George Peter Metesky was born November 2, 1903 in Waterbury, Connecticut. He was the youngest of 3 kids raised by Lithuanian immigrants. His family was poor but deeply religious, and he grew up in a tight working-class neighborhood. He went to church, and by all accounts he was a quiet, precise, and methodical young man. Following the First World War, he enlisted in the Marine Corps, serving as a specialist electrician at the American consulate in Shanghai. He came home with a sharp technical mind and a solid work ethic, landing a job as a mechanic for a subsidiary of Consolidated Edison. Then, on September 5, 1931, while he was working at the Hellgate plant in New York City, a boiler backfired. A blast of superheated gas hit Metesky, knocked him down, and seared his lungs. He didn't even get immediate medical care. He lay on the cold concrete for a long time before anyone helped him. The injury left him disabled. After 26 weeks of sick pay, they fired him and denied his compensation claim. According to Metesky, the company's lawyers and his own coworkers lied in court to block his claim. They won. He filed 3 appeals and lost every single one, with the final rejection coming in 1936. George Metesky became obsessed with a grievance he couldn't let go. He sent desperate letters to the mayor, the police commissioner, and every newspaper he could find. He later claimed he sent nearly 900 letters to officials and the press without getting a single reply. He spent years back in Waterbury, living with his 2 unmarried sisters, getting sicker from what he was convinced was tuberculosis caused by the original explosion, growing more isolated, and more convinced the world had wronged him. In November 1940, he reached his breaking point. He left his first homemade bomb on a ledge at a Consolidated Edison building on West 64th Street in Manhattan. It was a short piece of brass pipe packed with gunpowder inside a toolbox, with a note in block letters reading "Con Edison crooks, this is for you." It didn't go off. In September 1941, a second bomb turned up nearby, but that one was also a dud. Shortly after the United States entered the Second World War, police found a letter typed in that same block lettering. "I will stop making bombs for the duration of the war. My patriotism forces this choice. Eventually, I will bring Con Edison to justice. They will pay for their terrible deeds. F.P." And he kept his word. For nearly a decade, New York was silent. A signature Metesky later admitted stood for fair play. Then in 1951, he returned, and this time, the bombs exploded. Over the next 5 years, George Metesky planted pipe bombs packed with gunpowder, rigged with cheap pocket watch timers, and tucked into wool socks across New York's busiest public spots. He hit Grand Central Terminal 5 separate times, Pennsylvania Station 5 times, and Radio City Music Hall 3 times. The New York Public Library twice, the Port Authority bus terminal twice, and movie theaters at the RCA building, where he sliced seat cushions to hide his devices. Macy's department store and various subway stations also became targets. He occasionally called in warnings before his devices actually detonated. He kept sending letters to newspapers, promising more carnage and venting his grievances. The writing was formal and strangely precise, something investigators found deeply unsettling, almost like it had been translated into English from another language. By 1956, when a bomb at the Brooklyn Paramount injured 6 people in a theater packed with 1,500, the police, Commissioner Stephen Kennedy, launched what he called the biggest manhunt in the history of the New York Police Department. They put up a $26,000 reward for any tips. The city was living in pure terror, yet they still had no suspect. But you and I know the breakthrough came from a totally unexpected place. The NYPD brought in James Brussel, a psychiatrist and criminologist, to review the crime scene photos, the bomb parts, and all those letters FP had mailed. Brussel built a profile of the bomber that was honestly ahead of its time. He concluded the man was likely a Slav, probably Catholic, aged 40 to 50, living in Connecticut, unmarried and living with a female relative, with serious mechanical skills. He even predicted that when they finally caught him, he would be wearing a double-breasted suit, buttoned up, and newspapers ran the profile in December 1956. Metesky actually responded to a New York Journal American open letter, signing it FP, and giving away just enough detail about his old workplace injury. September 5, 1931, that a clerk named Alice Kelly found his records at Con Edison. The word injustice had been scrawled across his file in bright red ink. The tone of those documents matched his letters perfectly. Police pulled up to Metesky's house on 174th Street in Waterbury, Connecticut, right before midnight on January 21, 1957. They asked him to write the letter G. Then they asked what FP meant. He simply said, "Fair play." His garage workshop was packed with bomb-making gear pipes, pocket watches, flashlight batteries, and rolls of wool socks. Inside his pantry, they found pipe connectors and loose wool socks that matched the ones left at every bombing scene. George Metesky was 53 years old. He wore a tightly buttoned, double-breasted suit, facing 47 charges, including attempted murder. Psych evaluation diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic. Consequently, the court declared him legally insane and unfit for trial. He was sent to Mattawan Hospital. In 1973, a Supreme Court ruling on commitment standards led to his transfer and eventual release. He was 70 at the time. Metesky returned to Waterbury, living quietly until his death in 1994 at age 90. In his final interview after his release, he claimed, "I wrote 900 letters to the mayor, the police commissioner, and the papers, yet I never received a single postcard back." Metesky's case fundamentally changed American policing. James Brussels' profile of him remains one of the first and most effective examples of psychological criminal profiling. It is a methodology that is now standard practice for investigating serial and pattern crimes. His story wasn't just random fury. It was a systematic, calculated act of revenge carried out by a man convinced that every institution he trusted had betrayed him. Number 5. Julio Gonzalez. Julio Gonzalez was born on October 10, 1954, in Holguin, Cuba. He grew up facing severe poverty and political repression. As a young man, he served in the Cuban military, though records later show he deserted and spent 3 years in prison during the 70s. Then, in 1980, he spotted an opportunity shared by tens of thousands of others. The Mariel boat lift was a massive exodus, allowing Cubans to reach the United States. To secure his passage, Gonzalez reportedly faked a criminal record as a drug dealer, a strange gamble that actually paid off amidst the chaos of the boat lift. He arrived in Florida, traveled through Wisconsin and Arkansas, and eventually settled in New York City. Sponsored by a nonprofit in Manhattan, he moved to the Bronx and took a factory job in Queens. He lived in a rented room, embedding himself in a community of recent immigrants from the same wave. Largely Honduran, they often connected through local social clubs and community spaces. He began dating a woman named Lydia Feliciano, who worked checking coats at a social club called Happy Land, located on Southern Boulevard in the Bronx. By early 1990, his life was falling apart. He'd lost his factory job and was 2 weeks behind on rent. Lydia had broken up with him 6 weeks earlier, and the split was bitter. He couldn't move on. He kept showing up at her workplace. On the night of Saturday, March 24, 1990, he demanded she return to him. It was the night before Easter, and the Honduran and Garifuna community in the Bronx was in high spirits. Hundreds had gathered at the Happy Land Social Club for a carnival celebration. The club was unlicensed. The city had ordered it closed in 1988 for code violations, specifically lacking fire exits, alarms, and sprinklers. The fire department never even followed up on the violations. The club was absolutely packed. People were dancing everywhere. A DJ spun records upstairs. The crowd was young, mostly new immigrants, finding a moment of joy in a city that made life incredibly hard. Julio Gonzalez showed up at the Happy Land Club around 3 in the morning. He'd been drinking heavily. He found Lydia Feliciano at the coat check, begging her to quit and leave with him. She wouldn't budge. She told him she was done for good. The bouncer threw him out. As he was shoved out the door, he was screaming drunken threats. He swore he'd shut the place down. He swore he'd be back. He headed to a nearby gas station and bought $1 worth of gas in a plastic jug. Then he walked back to the Happy Land Social Club. He stood at the base of the stairs, the only way in or out for 87 people inside. He poured the gas. He lit it. The fire took 5 minutes to burn out. It didn't need any longer than that. Toxic smoke raced up that single staircase faster than anyone could ever run. Some victims were found with drinks still in their hands. 19 bodies lay downstairs near the door. 68 were trapped upstairs. Many had crowded against the walls, desperately trying to reach exits that simply didn't exist. A few managed to punch a hole through a wall into the next building. Some survived that way. Only 6 people made it out alive. 87 didn't. Gonzalez just walked home, took off his soaked clothes, and went to sleep. By the next afternoon, investigators spoke to Lydia Feliciano, and she told them everything about the fight and Gonzalez. Police tracked him down quickly. Once read his rights, he confessed to starting the fire. Honestly, he didn't seem to show any regret, certainly not like someone surprised by the carnage a dollar of gas could cause. He faced 174 murder charges, 2 for every victim under New York law. On August 19, 1991, a jury convicted him on 87 counts of murder and arson. He got the maximum sentence, 25 years to life for every single count. Though state law meant those sentences for multiple murders from one act had to be served concurrently. Gonzalez was denied parole back in March of 2015. He died from a heart attack at the correctional facility in Plattsburgh on September 13, 2016, at 61. He never stepped foot outside a prison again. The Happy Land fire remains New York City's deadliest blaze since the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. And it is a chilling coincidence that both disasters happened on March 25th, exactly 79 years apart. Today, the street where the club stood is known as the Plaza of the 87. A memorial now stands there, carved with the name of every person lost that night. What Julio Gonzalez did in those few minutes between the station and the stairs wasn't a calculated plan or some warped ideology. It wasn't the result of a slow psychological breakdown either. It was just the violent, irreversible rage of a man who'd lost everything and decided to take as many people with him as the fire would allow. 87 names are carved into that memorial. Each one of them came to the Happy Land Social Club that night to celebrate. Number 6 on the list is Colin Ferguson. Ferguson was born January 14, 1958 in Kingston, Jamaica, into a life of privilege. His father, Von Herman Ferguson, was a prominent pharmacist and managing director of a massive firm called Hercules Agencies. Years later, Time magazine would call Von Herman one of Jamaica's most influential businessmen. Ferguson attended Calabar High School in Kingston, where his principal remembered him as a well-rounded student, a cricket and soccer player who ranked in the top third of his class. Everything about his early life suggested he was a young man destined to build upon his father's success. Then, in 1978, when Ferguson was 20, his father died in a car crash. Government officials and military leaders packed the funeral. His mother passed away from cancer soon after. These losses shattered the family's wealth, and according to those who knew him, something much deeper broke inside him. Friends said the tragedies profoundly disturbed his psyche. The young man who had known only comfort was suddenly entirely alone. He moved to the United States in 1982 on a visitor visa. His new reality was nothing like the life he left. He could only find menial labor. Acquaintances noticed him struggling with what he saw as constant racial discrimination, and his fury over not finding work that matched his background began to fester into an intense, mounting grievance. He married an American woman, Audrey Warren, in 1986, gaining permanent residency. The couple settled down on Long Island. Their marriage was volatile and ended in a bitter divorce in 1988. Friends said the split was a crushing blow. He found work in clerical roles. He enrolled at Nassau Community College and made the dean's list 3 times, a detail that proves he was genuinely capable. He transferred to Adelphi University to study business, but his behavior on campus quickly turned erratic. He started accusing professors and students of racism. He once interrupted a faculty meeting to scream, "Kill everybody white." He kept making threats and was finally suspended from Adelphi in June 1991. By February 1992, he was arrested after shouting at a woman on the subway and pressing his body against her when she tried to sit down. He was put on a watch list by the New York State Workers' Compensation Board due to a long, nasty dispute over a workplace injury. He moved to California in 1993. He applied for jobs and faced constant rejection. He bought a Ruger P89 9mm pistol at a Long Beach sporting goods shop, waiting the full 15 days mandated by state law. He headed back to New York in May of that year, telling friends he hated competing with immigrants for jobs, a statement that shows how his sense of grievance had become completely disconnected from any logic or reality. In the months leading up to December 1993, his landlord said Ferguson could be heard chanting to himself at night. The words, as the landlord recalled, were all about black people killing white people. His landlord gave him his eviction notice on December 7, 1993. Colin Ferguson climbed onto the 5:33 p.m. train heading east from Manhattan's Penn Station. He carried a canvas bag packed with his pistol and 160 rounds of ammunition. He settled into a seat in the third car of the train bound for Hicksville, sitting quietly while it rolled through Queens, just waiting. As the train drew near the Marylawn Avenue station in Garden City Park, he rose from his seat. He fumbled a few cartridges onto the floor, maybe from nerves or the weight of his plan. Then he opened fire. Moving slowly down the center aisle, he fired indiscriminately to his left and right, pausing for a heartbeat before each shot, keeping a steady rhythm for 3 long minutes. He muttered, "I am going to get you," over and over. By the time he stopped, 6 people were dead. 19 others suffered gunshot wounds but managed to survive. As he paused to reload his 3rd magazine, a passenger screamed, "Grab him!" 3 men, Michael O'Connor, Kevin Blum, and Mark McKenty, rushed him and pinned him down across the seats. While they held him, Ferguson kept repeating, "Oh God, what did I do? I deserve whatever I get." At trial, he fired his lawyers to represent himself. He talked about himself in the 3rd person, even asking victims, "Did you see Colin Ferguson shoot you?" Survivors looked him in the eye from the witness stand and replied, "I saw you shoot me." He insisted he had just fallen asleep and that some mystery man stole his gun to commit the murders. He actually asked the judge for permission to call President Bill Clinton to the stand. He even accused a parapsychologist of holding proof that an Asian man had implanted a chip in his brain. The trial became a legal spectacle that people were talking about for years afterward. In February 1995, he was convicted on 6 counts of murder and 19 of attempted murder, receiving a sentence of over 315 years to life. He is not eligible for parole until August 6, 2309. He remains locked up at the Mid-State Correctional Facility. One victim was Dennis McCarthy. His wife, Carolyn McCarthy, had never touched politics before. She worked as a nurse. After losing her husband and nearly losing her son, she ran for Congress in 1996, campaigning on gun control, and she won. She went on to serve 9 terms in the House of Representatives. Colin Ferguson was a man unraveling, letting his bitterness and resentment fester until those dark thoughts consumed everything else in his life. That decline is not exactly a mystery. What is truly disturbing is how long he went unnoticed, hidden in plain sight among thousands of people every single day. Number 7. Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman was born on May 10, 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas. His father served as an Air Force staff sergeant, and his mother worked as a nurse. The family relocated to Decatur, Georgia, while Mark was still a boy, and that is where his childhood turned into the painful story he would eventually detail to psychiatrists. He claimed he lived in constant fear of his father, who he said was physically abusive to his mother and cold toward him. To escape, he retreated into a vivid internal fantasy world. He later described a hidden group of little imaginary people who lived inside his bedroom walls, where he held total benevolent control. He was their king, they loved him. The real world felt empty by comparison. But at school, he was just a target for bullies. By his mid-teens, he was skipping class and using drugs. At 14, he even ran away to Miami for 2 weeks. Then, at 16, everything shifted. He embraced evangelical Christianity and discovered a real passion for helping kids. And honestly, by all accounts, he became a remarkably gifted youth counselor. During summers at a Georgia YMCA camp, the kids called him Nemo. Supervisors even named him Counselor of the Season. He earned a promotion to assistant director. Anyone working with him back then described a warm, dedicated, and truly caring young man. He moved on to World Vision International, helping Vietnamese refugees at a camp in Arkansas. His program director, David Moore, called him a deeply compassionate worker who genuinely cared for those in his care. Even President Gerald Ford shook his hand during a meeting about that work. For a few years, Mark David Chapman actually seemed to be building a life with real purpose. Then, he enrolled at Covenant College in Georgia. His grades slipped. A relationship ended. He started feeling like a total failure. He dropped out and went back to camp counseling, but a fight with a supervisor forced him out. In 1977, he moved to Hawaii, where his mental health spiraled. He tried to take his own life by running a hose from his exhaust pipe into his car. The hose melted. The attempt failed. He checked into Castle Memorial Hospital, where a psychiatrist treated him for severe clinical depression. After he got out, he took a job as a maintenance worker at the same hospital. That was when he read J.D. Salinger's novel, The Catcher in the Rye. For him, the book became a personal revelation. He identified completely with the main character, Holden Caulfield. a teenager railing against the phoniness of the adult world, feeling deeply alienated, craving authenticity, and raging at its absence everywhere he looked. Chapman didn't just want to be Holden Caulfield. Some say he started to believe he was. He married a Japanese-American woman named Gloria Abe in 1979. For a while, he seemed stable. He worked as a printer at the hospital and later took a night security job at a luxury apartment complex. But he started drinking heavily. As his depression hit rock bottom, his fixation on John Lennon, someone he'd admired since he was a kid, turned cold and dark. He started reading biographies about Lennon's life in New York. He listened to Lennon's solo albums and started getting angry. He was furious at what he saw as Lennon's hypocrisy. A man singing Imagine while living in a massive apartment on the Upper West Side, surrounded by extreme wealth. To Chapman's fracturing mind, Lennon was the ultimate phony, a total fraud, telling the world to imagine a better life while living one most people could never touch. He began to plan. He bought a .38 Special Charter Arms revolver. In October 1980, he flew to New York with the gun, lost his nerve, and flew back to Hawaii. He told his wife his plans. She didn't call the police. He booked a psych appointment but skipped it. December 6, 1980, he flew to New York. He hung around the Dakota for 2 days, that famous Upper West Side building where John Lennon lived with Yoko Ono and their young son. He even chatted with fans hanging out by the entrance. He picked up a copy of The Catcher in the Rye and wrote inside it, "This is my statement," signing it Holden Caulfield. On the afternoon of December 8th, as Lennon and Ono headed out to a recording session, Chapman stepped up, holding out a copy of Lennon's new album, Double Fantasy. Lennon signed it. A fan nearby snapped a photo of the moment. Chapman stood there, gripping the signed record, watching the limo pull away. He just waited. Around 10:50 that night, Lennon and Ono returned to the Dakota. They got out and walked toward the building's archway. Chapman was waiting in the shadows. He called out. Some witnesses say he shouted Lennon's name, but others aren't sure. He dropped into a combat stance and fired 5 hollow-point rounds from just feet away. 4 of them hit Lennon in the back and shoulder. Lennon stumbled into the reception area and collapsed. Officers didn't wait for an ambulance. They rushed him to Roosevelt Hospital, but he was gone. Chapman didn't run. He just stood there reading The Catcher in the Rye when police found him. He didn't put up a fight. He told the cops, "I'm sure the big part of me is Holden Caulfield, from the book. The small part of me must be the devil." His lawyers prepped an insanity defense, with 6 psychiatrists calling him psychotic. 3 prosecution experts disagreed on how sick he really was. Right before the trial, Chapman told his legal team to switch to a guilty plea. He claimed God told him to do it. He got 20 years to life. During his sentencing, he stood up and read a passage from The Catcher in the Rye. That part where Holden describes catching children before they fall off a cliff. Mark David Chapman has been denied parole 13 times. He is currently locked up at Greenhaven Correctional Facility in upstate New York. In hearings, he has said he regrets the murder, admitting he killed Lennon for selfish reasons. Whether that regret is real or just a performance is something no parole board has been willing to bet on. Mark David Chapman shows us how a dark mind can twist its favorite ideals into something deadly. He loved a book about the world's phoniness so much that he used it to justify destroying one of our greatest voices. The contradiction is total, and the damage is permanent. Number 8. Santa Keys. Born Santa Singers on July 24, 1934 in Oklahoma City. Her father, an immigrant from India by way of Canada, died from heart disease when she was 5. Her younger sister, Retha, later said their childhood was marked by deep and lasting trauma. Imagine a girl who tormented animals on her own family farm. She held lit matches under her sister's fingers, stealing and lying without a second thought. As a teen, Sante headed for California. She eventually settled in Carson City, Nevada, and graduated high school in 1952. Classmates knew her as a bully who picked on anyone younger or smaller than her. She married twice, starting with a contractor named Edward Walker. During that marriage, she committed insurance fraud by torching a house he built, pocketing $10,000 in damages. Dozens of other properties Walker managed burned down while they were married. She even stepped out with his business partners before they divorced in 1969. By then, she had a massive rap sheet ranging from shoplifting to arson. Nothing stopped her. And in 1971, she met Kenneth Kimes Sr., a motel mogul worth around $20 million. She read about his divorce and set her sights on him. They married in 1981 and had a son, Kenneth Kimes Jr., born in 1975. For decades, Sante used his wealth and status to hide a massive criminal enterprise. She committed insurance fraud and forged documents, impersonated others at will, and enslaved domestic workers. Most were young, undocumented women lured by fake job offers, then held captive through threats of deportation. In 1985, she was finally convicted in federal court for violating anti-slavery laws. She served 3 years behind bars. After her release in 1989, Kenneth Sr. died from a brain aneurysm in 1994. By then, the partnership that would define her final chapter was already set. That partner was her own son, Kenneth Jr. Kenneth Kimes Jr. grew up completely trapped in his mother's orbit. By all accounts, she methodically trained him from childhood in the dark arts of manipulation and crime. He worshipped his mother, but he also feared her. By the time he was an adult, he couldn't even tell the difference. Together, they moved across the country: Hawaii, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and finally New York, leaving a trail of theft, fraud, arson, forgery, and what investigators later realized were multiple murders starting in 1991. Elmer Holgren, a lawyer Sante hired to burn a Hawaii property, vanished after telling his family he was heading to Costa Rica with Sante and Kenneth Sr. His body later turned up in a California dumpster. Even then, no charges were ever filed. In 1996, banker Syed Bilal Ahmed, who managed Sante's offshore accounts, vanished and drowned. Kenneth Jr. later confessed to his part in that killing. Once again, absolutely no charges were filed. Then came David Kasdan, a 63-year-old businessman who made the fatal mistake of letting Sante use his name on a deed. When Sante forged Kasdan's signature on a $280,000 loan application, he threatened to expose her, so she ordered her son to kill him. On March 9, 1998, Kenneth Jr. shot Kasdan in the back of the head. His body was dumped near Los Angeles International Airport. 3 months later, in New York City, Sante and Kenneth Jr. committed the crime that finally brought them to justice. Irene Silverman was 82, a former Roquette and a well-known socialite. She was a woman of true warmth and sharp intelligence, and she owned a Manhattan townhouse on East 65th Street worth nearly $8 million. She had a habit of renting rooms to young men she found interesting. In May 1998, a man calling himself Manny Green moved in. It was actually Kenneth Kimes Jr. His mission was to gather intel on her finances, her daily routines, and her legal papers. Sante planned to steal Silverman's identity. They would forge the house deed over to a fake company they controlled. Then they planned to vanish before the fraud was uncovered. Silverman was marked for murder to seal the deal. On July 5, 1998, Irene Silverman vanished from her own home, never seen again. Her body was never recovered. That same night, the FBI and NYPD arrested Sante and Kenneth outside the New York Hilton. When they searched Kenneth, they found Silverman's keys, tapes of her phone calls, plastic handcuffs, loaded guns, disguises, and $30,000 in cash, a stash of date-rape drugs, plus a forged document attempting to sell her townhouse for peanuts. Sante had kept 15 notebooks detailing her victims, their money, and her twisted methods. In May 2000, a jury convicted them on 118 counts, including murder. Even without a body, the evidence was overwhelming. It became one of the most famous no-body murder cases in New York history. Sante got 120 years to life. She actually compared her trial to the Salem witch trials. The judge flatly called her a sociopath and a degenerate. Kenneth Jr. was sent to California to face charges for the Kasdan murder. He took a plea deal in 2004. He testified against his own mother to avoid the death penalty for both of them. He confessed to both murders and more. He is serving time in California today. Sante Kimes died at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in May 2014 at age 79. She went to her grave claiming she was innocent. The Kasdan case judge called her one of the most evil people she had ever seen. Sante Kimes is a perfect case, a chilling study of what happens when charm and brains are stripped of empathy. She built her life on ruining others long before she turned to murder. It took the disappearance of a woman the city couldn't ignore to finally bring her down. Number 9. Robert Chambers. Robert Emmett Chambers Jr. was born in 1968 in New York City, an only child raised by an Irish-American family on the Upper East Side. His mother, Phyllis, worked as a nurse and later in medical sales. She was obsessed with her son, perhaps too much so. Many would later say she shielded him from consequences that might have saved him. Robert was tall, handsome, and naturally charming. He bounced through elite New York private schools, including Knickerbocker, York Prep, and a short stint at Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut. Without fail, he kept getting kicked out, usually over theft. The pattern started early and never broke. He robbed his own classmates and even a friend's mother. He snatched jewelry and credit cards. Choate finally expelled him after a theft. He tried the nursing program at Boston University, but got booted for credit card theft and fled back to Manhattan. He eventually checked into an outpatient rehab program for substance abuse. Nothing stuck. He faced zero real consequences. By summer '86, Robert Chambers was 19, jobless, living at his parents' place on East 90th Street, drifting through the social scene of the Upper East Side, hosting on that effortless charm of a guy who always got his way. He drank, did a lot of cocaine, and kept stealing to pay for it. To anyone meeting him at a party, he seemed exactly like what he was, a gorgeous, directionless, privileged kid with a warm smile and a hollow soul. Jennifer Levin was 18, a bright, popular Baldwin School grad who everyone loved. She and Chambers ran in the same circles. They had a history not dating, but something else. A tension that everyone around them felt was unresolved. During the early hours of August 26, 1986, the pair were spotted leaving Dorian's Red Hand on 2nd Avenue around 4:30 a.m. They walked into Central Park together. What happened over the next 30 minutes would trigger one of the most intense and culturally explosive murder trials in New York City history. A cyclist found Jennifer Levin's body around 6 a.m. near the 84th Street Park entrance, behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was dead on the grass, strangled. Her face, neck, and shoulders were covered in bruises and scrapes. Chambers was the last person seen with her. Police found him at home and brought him in for questioning. When detectives saw fresh scratches on his face, he claimed Jennifer did it. He told investigators they had been involved in consensual sex in the park and she had grabbed him hard, hurting him. He claimed that in a split-second attempt to pull away, he accidentally got his arm around her neck and killed her. He insisted it was just a tragic accident during rough sex. The rough sex defense, as the media dubbed it, went to the jury after one of the longest, most sensational trials the city had ever seen. Tabloids covered every single detail with a ferocity that captured New York's '80s anxieties. It was all about class, youth, privilege, and brutal violence. Chambers' team attacked Jennifer's reputation, sparking massive public outrage by suggesting she was actually the aggressor in a sexual encounter gone bad. Her parents had to sit there and listen to her being blamed for her own murder. The trial dragged on for 9 weeks. The jury debated for 9 days. They couldn't agree. The trial ended in a hung jury for the most serious charges. Rather than face another trial, Chambers pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and got 5 to 15 years. He walked free in 2003. 5 years later, in 2008, he was busted in Manhattan for selling drugs right in front of the police. A raid on his place turned up a stash of cocaine. He was convicted and handed 19 years. He finally got out in 2023. The name Jennifer Levin still haunts New York City, and it should. She walked into Central Park on a summer night and never made it home. The man who took her life served just 15 years for manslaughter, walked free, went back to dealing, got locked up again, and is now out on the street. This case changed how New York and the entire country viewed the limits of the rough sex defense. It showed how wealth and charm could twist a courtroom narrative and victimize the dead all over again. Number 10. Robert Garrow Sr. Robert Francis Garrow Sr. was born in 1936, way up in the North Country of upstate New York. He grew up in the harsh Adirondack foothills, near a little town called Mineville in Essex County. One of 11 kids, he lived in absolute poverty. But what made his childhood truly dark wasn't just the money, it was the documented, brutal abuse he suffered. His own father beat him regularly and savagely. He was sexually abused as a child, something his lawyers would later argue in court, and that he even confirmed in his own interviews. He kept running away, only to end up in reform school. By his teenage years, his record for burglary and sexual assault followed him like a dark shadow. He did prison time in the '60s for rape. Once he got out, he tried to build a normal-looking life in Syracuse. He got married and had kids. He worked as a laborer. To his neighbors, he seemed stable, but underneath, the old darkness remained. In the summer of 1973, Robert Garrow went on a killing spree in the Adirondacks. He was 36. His first victim was Philip Dumbleski, just 18 years old, a college student from Schenectady camping out in the woods near Speculator. Garrow found the group of campers, and on the night of July 29, 1973, he attacked. He wired Philip Dumbleski to a tree and stabbed him to death. The other campers managed to run into the woods and call for help. A massive manhunt exploded across the Adirondack wilderness, one of the biggest in the region's history. Garrow slipped through their fingers for 3 weeks, using his survival skills to move through the forest like a ghost. During that time on the run, the public and the police learned he had also snatched and murdered 2 young women, Susan Petz, a 21-year-old from Illinois, and 16-year-old Alicia Hawk from Syracuse. He hid their bodies in spots he had clearly scouted out beforehand, like a man who had planned for this. A fourth victim, a young woman named Carol Ann Malinowski, was found murdered in the same area around that time. And Garrow was eventually tied to her death, too. On August 9, 1973, they finally caught him in Witherby, in the Adirondacks. Officers spotted him. A shootout followed, and after he was wounded, they took him into custody. For weeks, he had been hiding out in the deep woods. What happened next turned into a massive legal debate over attorney-client privilege in America. Not because of the murders themselves, but because of what Garrow confessed to his defense lawyers, Frank Armani and Francis Belge, while they were prepping his case. He told them exactly where he had hidden the bodies of Susan Petz and Alicia Hawk. Armani and Belge went to those spots and confirmed the remains were actually there. They took photos, but they were bound by the strict attorney-client privilege rules that dictate what a defense lawyer can or cannot reveal without the client saying so. They stayed silent. No word to the police, no word to the families. For months, those lawyers kept quiet while the families of Susan and Alicia continued to search and pray, hoping their daughters might somehow still be alive. When the truth finally came out, the legal and ethical firestorm was brutal. Both lawyers faced investigations but were ultimately cleared of any criminal acts. The courts ruled that the privilege which forces a defense attorney to keep client secrets had to hold firm. As agonizing as that result was, the case became a landmark in American legal ethics. It is still taught in law schools today because it pushed the limits of privilege to the breaking point. A confessed killer had told his lawyers where he dumped the bodies. Those lawyers saw the evidence with their own eyes, but the law demanded they stay silent. During his 1974 trial, Robert Garrow represented himself for a while, giving testimony that witnesses called incoherent and disturbing. He was convicted for the murder of Philip Dumbleski and sentenced to 25 years. But he never finished that sentence. On September 11, 1978, Garrow escaped from the Fishkill Correctional Facility in New York, scaling the prison fence using a makeshift ramp he had built. He had been using the area for rehab after the injuries he sustained during his arrest. Guards finally realized he was gone during a routine head count. A search of the prison perimeter turned up the ramp and his footprints. State police launched a massive manhunt. 2 days later, on September 13, 1978, they found Garrow in the woods near Mineville. It was back in the same county where he was born and raised, the place that shaped the man he became. He was armed with a rifle when they found him. He opened fire on the officers. They fired back, and he was killed. He was 42. Those grieving families, the parents of Susan and Alicia, only learned the truth about their daughter's remains after Garrow finally spoke up during his own trial. That disclosure came months after his own lawyers had already visited those graves in secret. The crushing grief those families endured through months of uncertainty, combined with the legal firestorm the silence caused, remains the legacy of the Garrow case. He was a man defined by violence from the very start, carrying that destruction through his entire adult life, leaving a permanent scar on the Adirondacks and the families of his victims, families and the legal system in ways that left a mark long after he was gone.